So I'm Trent Batson. I'm Executive Director of the, now get this, the Association for Authentic, Experiential, and Evidence-Based Learning, AEBL, A-A-E-E-B-L. And the whole point is we are an organization that arose out of the ePortfolio community worldwide. And so we all decided we wanted to form an association. But we want to focus on the learning changes that we think that ePortfolios can help accelerate and not on the technology itself. So that's the reason for the name of the organization. We started a year ago. We now sit here and we now have 90 institutional members around the world in 5 countries. We have 15 to 20 corporate sponsors and we're underway. So this is going to be talk about ePortfolios. Also with me is Melissa Peet, who is Academic Director of the ePortfolio Initiative at University of Michigan. And Cheryl Hansen, who was going to be with us, could not make it, so just be the 2 of us this morning. And Melissa tells me that she lets me go first so that then she can be the explicator, telling you actually what I meant as I go through these. So, for those of you who don't know too much about ePortfolios or have heard the term but don't actually know, a good model to think of is Facebook. It's very, very similar to Facebook in a number of ways. They're both, in a lot of ways, social networking sites. More and more so, ePortfolio systems are moving away from campus-based, login-based, sort of proprietary things on campus to being much more open and much more collaborative and Web 2.0 kind of interface aspects to it. So it's moving in the direction that we would have hoped, toward a Web 2.0 reality. And so it's like Facebook. Both Facebook and portfolios, though, do protect you. You can agree as to who's going to be a friend, and someone can't just friend you without you saying, yes, I will be this person's friend. So there are some permission controls and some settings. Facebook also has security settings. I'm not sure all of you are aware of that, but you can go somewhere and find your security settings and set that too. So both portfolios and Facebook have permissions control. And they're both social sites, essentially, in that you can collaborate and communicate with various people over time with your ePortfolio. And they both archive some things. Now, of course, Facebook is not primarily about archiving. You can keep photos there, but your comments go away over time and so forth. So mostly stuff does not stay there forever on Facebook. And of course, we know that Facebook can at any point change the parameters and whatever you had there will disappear. So it's not really your owned space, it's really Facebook's space. But they both do social and archiving. And electronic portfolio can be either social or private, unlike Facebook. It can be just, say you and your teacher. You can limit it to that. So it's an owner-controlled site, the electronic portfolio. And in both, you can, and within the electronic portfolio, unlike Facebook, you can manage your archives. That's a large part of the functionality of electronic portfolios, is managing, searching, and reconstructing, and selecting, presenting stuff from your electronic portfolio. So, and one of the things I've always looked for in the 25 years I've been involved with educational technology and learning is that look for the applications that people actually want to use in their free time. And that's what you build on. And I think that's what the social web is all about and the direction that we're moving in. The idea of having, no one uses, I'm sorry if anyone's from Blackboard in the room, but I think that anyone from Blackboard would agree that people do not generally choose to use Blackboard for fun in their leisure time. But that is something that people do with their ePortfolios, believe it or not. And that's the whole idea, I think, is you want to do something that people actually want to do. There's some basic instinct, of collecting things or of talking to other people that is the primary function of that application. And so electronic portfolios are like that. People actually do use their portfolios in their free time. But there are distinct differences. The electronic portfolio is not free like Facebook, but you don't have advertising on the portfolio site either. Now, I should be clear, I'm talking about electronic portfolio platforms that are sold by companies. I'm not talking about something like using a wiki for a portfolio or a blog for a portfolio, but an actual ePortfolio platform. So those are not free. Someone has to pay something. It's often a student who may pay for their own account. It's not expensive. It's geared for students' ability to pay. Oftentimes, institutions pay on behalf of the students, but I think actually the trend may be toward students paying themselves and then being able to keep the portfolio after they graduate. Another difference with from Facebook is that portfolios, the student, if it's a student using the portfolio, the student does own the space. It is their copyrighted material. They are the ones who can say who can see it. And that means, either they could set it for public, the whole world. I don't think most do, and we don't advise people to do that, but they can do that. So, but they own that. And that's important because when students feel that they own the space that they're working in, they are much more engaged. And so we want them to be able to manipulate that space, control it, determine how it's structured as much as possible, so that they do have that feeling of, I have a stake in this class and in this learning as well as the teacher. It's not all on the teacher. I also have this space that I'm working in that I control and own. Portfolios, in theory, are a permanent archive. That's the intention. In practice, it's not happening a whole lot because it's, as I said before, usually the license is arranged through the university or the college. Now, in Minnesota, that's not true. In Minnesota, you have a portfolio for you that's provided for you for life. In Wales, that's true. In Scotland, that's true. In Pennsylvania, they hope that will be true soon, and California is looking to do that also. So that's another movement, is the idea of workforce development, having all citizens of a state or a country in Europe having a portfolio for life. We're still working on that here in the United States. And people often ask me, well, what happens to the student portfolio when they graduate? Can you take it with you? Is it transportable? Can you move it from one system to another? And the answer is usually no. You can keep a collection of files and put that on a DVD or something, but you can't really move because an ePortfolio doesn't exist in one place, just like Facebook doesn't exist in one place. It has many pages, you have different groups, you go to different places, you have photos here. You couldn't move, Facebook to Blackboard, for example. I mean, there's no way you'd have all that structure being able to go into another system. So, so neither one is really transportable, and I think that also relates to this notion that somehow people say, well, show me a portfolio, and I say, well, how can I? How would I show you a Facebook? I can show you the one iteration or one view of it, but a portfolio like Facebook is many, many different views. And another big difference is that a portfolio system does allow a student to create a web page. Now, Facebook, you can't do that, of course. I mean, I guess you could create something like that in a group. So just to show you a few examples of views from portfolios, this is University of Washington. This is one view that this student chose to present to someone for some purpose, graduation or a job or something. And then he has different things that he puts in here. But as you see, it's basically just a website where he has selected from his portfolio and put up things like you would in a resume. This is what I want to show for this particular purpose. And so there's more like that. This is another one. And here you can scroll down and just click on next if you want, and then she's got a whole, or you can go down the left side. Oops. You can go down the left side and click on any of those to see more. And then the final one, sometimes these are made in a wiki or a blog, but these are made, I'm not sure in what tool, but it's from the University of Washington. So those are just 3 examples of ways that students make views from their portfolio, selected views. Now, okay, great. So we've got some background on portfolios now, maybe a slightly clearer understanding. This is becoming widespread. I mean, it's over half of all universities are using portfolios in some way or another, not only in this country, but around the world. And it's a rapidly growing movement. It was sort of hit a high point in the around 2005, and so it sort of dropped off because people were using it more as tracking systems than as personal portfolios. But then the interest came back, and now the focus really is on student learning portfolios, assessing themselves for learning, or teachers assessing students through their portfolios. Well, so now, why is this really important? And why do I think, as many others do, that the portfolio is one way to facilitate the change from teaching to learning that everyone's talking about in this century? Shifting the focus from the teacher talking to the student doing. And this is all premised on the idea that a portfolio would be the deliverable in the course for the student. That would be their grade, is constructing the portfolio during the semester, and what they finally construct at the end is how they're graded. And so they have work to do. Their project is to build this portfolio during the semester, which makes, they are then thinking about the holistic notion of their work during the semester. And they have this record, so they can look back on it and make comments about it. They have a record. So there's a way of them seeing their participation in the course more organically, and not just I come and sit for an hour and then leave, and when's the test? So that's one big thing. Students are the performer and not the audience if they're building this portfolio during the semester. If used correctly, if there's some ways that people use, faculty set up the portfolio to be used, it can develop critical thinking skills. When I taught using a portfolio, when I was teaching writing, I allowed students, and this is the classic model in my field of composition and rhetoric. If you stop in the middle of the semester and students have been writing papers all semester, or some sort of documents that they've been writing, and then you allow them in the middle of the semester to look back. All right, there's 2 assignments that you can choose to redo now. You may have handed in 10 assignments, but now you can pick 2 of them and redo them. Look back, find out your weakest things, and see how you can, now that you know more, maybe you can do better. Now that's what motivates the students, but what is really good about that is then this is motivation for them to look back and reflect on their own changes and on their own work. So that's developing that kind of a critical skill, is that reflective thinking. As I said before, this kind of reorientation of the class from students listening to students doing is one way of doing this move from teaching to learning that so many people have been talking about during the last decade. OERs are open educational resources. Merlot, how many have heard of Merlot? Yeah, right, that's open educational resources. They're free. You'd be amazed about how you could add things to your syllabus, to your course, by just going to Merlot and using some of the tutorials that are there already. Nicely done. MIT Open Courseware Initiative, OCW, provides that. There's a Carnegie Mellon initiative I can't think of the name of right now. Open Learning Initiative. Yes, Open Learning Initiative. And then Rice University has connections. And there are many, many more examples. The Library of Congress itself has open educational resources, so OERs. So using a portfolio recognizes the fact that the information and knowledge that's been aggregated on the campus is not all that there is. There's stuff all out there. Everyone keeps saying it, but I mean, it's real, and it's not just like finding stuff on Google. It's actually where people are putting together collections of academically oriented and well-produced resources that anyone can use. So how do you recognize the fact that we are now immersed in a knowledge economy with rich resources everywhere, but if teachers are still thinking, well, they own knowledge and the university owns the knowledge, then they're ignoring 98% of what's available. So the portfolio is one way to deal with this mass of stuff around, is to be able to collect it in a place and react to it or use it in some way. All right, this second voice initiative, I'm going to take a minute to explain that. I think I said earlier in the opening panel that humans do have at least 3 threads. I mean, maybe there's more. I mean, who knows what goes on in a human's head. But supposedly now, and I have this delusion like every teacher does, I'm looking out at you and I'm thinking, okay, everyone is listening to what I'm saying and understanding what I'm saying and paying attention to only this particular first voice thread or stream of speech. So I'm imagining somehow, as most teachers do, that all of you, including those in the back row back there and those sitting at the side, even those with their laptops open, are actually paying attention, and there's nothing else going on in your head besides that. But of course, we know that's not true. We know from research using chat that there's always 3 threads. There's the on topic, and then humans have the ability to also think other things because your mind works faster than my mouth can work. So you have the opportunity in your head to be thinking about what I'm saying. Like maybe some of you are now thinking, this guy is dragging on too long about second voice. Or what did I miss when he first started this, because I don't understand this, right? I mean, who has a second voice in their head right now? Can anyone venture to say what their second voice is? What would be your comment if you had a off-topic comment about what I'm saying right now? Come on, don't be so, okay.
My second voice is planning the route to where I have to be after you're done.
Oh, okay. Okay, right? Good. People have to be brave. Now, that's the idea. What we want is students to be able to come up with their second voice, because they're thinking things like, is this going to be on the test? Oh, is he saying these are 3 things, so I have to write them down? Or they're thinking other things about it. Now, this is actually a reflective activity in the brain. This is what we want to develop in college students, is that reflective voice, that second voice. And so that's what we're doing. We're trying to we are moving portfolios toward more and more focus on reflections about the work. In other words, students interpreting the evidence that they're collecting, not just the evidence itself. This is more about that second voice. So reflections, a number of universities are actually saying with their portfolio, they want to stress the informal and ungraded reflections that students make about their work as they do the work or as they hand it in. And we're thinking about a standardized form within a portfolio system where it'd be limited to, say, 300 words, and you'd have prompts based on the discipline, and you'd have tags within that form so that students could tag that reflection. It's ungraded but required, and then over time they can search, look at their reflections, and then make capstone reflections about their changes over a certain amount of time. Now, second voice and comments have been around for a long time. Print almost killed it for us because, back when this phrase marginalia, right there, when books were first being handwritten and were so expensive, you might have a whole group of scholars who had just one book. And so people actually would write in the margins. And this became like a conversation, a second voice conversation around the text. Perfect. Come along with print. Books are so cheap then, relatively speaking. Everyone has a book, so the book is no longer a social site. It's now an individual site. So we lost something, in a way. Sometimes I used to buy used books when I was in college, and sometimes I saw other people's comments, so I guess there was some aspect of that. So even parentheses and footnotes are basically second voice comments. So the scheme, and I've already told you about this, so I won't go back over this again, but it's a way, we're developing a schema so to be a whole process, and we have a FIPSI proposal in that we're going to do this over 3 years to build this out. I already told you about AEBL, the organization. As I say, Case Western is actually a member of AEBL. We have 90 institutional members, and that's my contact information and the website for AEBL. If any of you are interested in pursuing more about portfolios, we'd be happy to talk with you. So thanks very much for your time, and I'm going to hand it off to Melissa.
Thanks. Oh, where is it? Oh, there it is.
Is that it there?
Mm-hmm. Hi there. I have to stand while I talk. I'm a kinesthetic learner. I can't actually, and a terrible student because I'm the one that's always wandering around while the teacher's talking. I can't take in information unless I'm moving. And oftentimes the way that I learn is by talking about our project. So I'm going to talk about, I'm not just going to, well, I don't really need to explicate what Trent said, so that was my I misspoke. I'm going to just provide an example of what is this integrative and lifelong learning look like at one institution. And I'm going to talk about the University of Michigan. And so I'm going to begin with some initial thoughts and questions. And when I say the we in here, I mean higher education institutions. So how can we educate students to learn for life if we don't teach them how to learn from life? And so what if we were to think for a moment that the curriculum is not just a thing that us coveted educators talk about in our classroom and the stuff that we put on syllabi, but what if we were to think about that life itself is a curriculum and that people are always learning, which they are. There's lots of research that shows that the things that we learn in higher education institutions cover about 10% of the tacit and expert knowledge that we will acquire and need to know and innovate with and change with and adapt with over our lifetime. So yeah, this notion of lifelong learning is very much becoming increasingly a policy rhetoric issue, but there's absolutely nothing out there in terms of theory and practice. So I hope to cover some of that road. And the next one is actually, how can we prepare students for a world of change if we don't teach them about how change happens? So actually and so these are sort of the fundamental questions that guide the work that I do at the University of Michigan. And I'm very quickly going to talk about the ePortfolio instance at Michigan is not at all about technology. Technology follows a very specific pedagogy that was developed from 5 years of research that was asking the question, and 5 years of action research that involved hundreds and hundreds of students and dozens of faculty, and it's still growing. Right now we have 2,000 students and over 100 different educators involved. And it's from this research set of questions that have to do with how do you educate leaders and change agents? What kind of curriculum do you need in order to educate people who can learn for life and innovate and create both institutional and social change as they go through life? So those little questions. So, okay, and that the research that underlies this process was developed along 3 fundamental principles that are actually not often the principles used in higher education, which is these are the principles that I was taught about knowledge making and assessment. That any curriculum that you have to build should be built upon answering the question, well, what works in the real world? And then build it into your curriculum. So for instance, if you want to teach a course on environmental justice, then the curriculum should be centered on, well, what works in the world in terms of advancing environmental justice issues. Not just most curriculum in higher education will do a great deal to explicate the problem, but not to do commensurate attention to how you create the solution. So basically find out what works and put it into your curriculum. Number 2, effective assessment should focus on how people use the knowledge in the context of their lives. So what happens in higher education is that I take a test, I take a course. At the end of that course, I take a test, and that test sort of assesses whether or not I've learned the content of that course. It has absolutely nothing to do with how I may or may not be using that knowledge in the real world or how I might actually use that 5 years from now. So imagine if we did like medical outcomes the same way. The parallel in medical outcomes would be you take the chemo treatment. Before you leave the hospital that day, they ask you if you took it and how much you're throwing up, but they don't actually measure whether or not the cancer went away. Right? So that's how off we are in education when it comes to evaluation and assessment. It's all about the content. And so what we need for a 21st century knowledge economy, of course, is not about the content. It's about how do we use the knowledge in real life. Okay. So anyhow, and this last one really quick, is that the effectiveness of a program, a curriculum, an institution, should be measured in terms of how well it supports people in the context of their lives. Again, we don't even begin to think about doing that in higher education. But those were the principles that I was taught in terms of when I was doing my master's and PhD work at Michigan, in actually my master's work in social work, and then PhD work in education. So these principles in action research is how do we educate ethical leaders and change agents? OK, so I'm going to very quickly talk about 4 years of research in one slide. OK, just what? All right. So in 2002, I did focus groups with 130 students who were going through a curriculum that was developed to educate them to be change agents and leaders. And at the end of that year, and these students were doing incredibly well in their classes. These classes were incredibly difficult and with very dedicated faculty and all that kind of stuff. So let's say that these were all high-achieving students academically. And when I put them in 19 different focus groups and said, well, so how do you feel about how you can translate this knowledge to the real world and address social issues? Overwhelmingly, they all said, absolutely not. In fact, that year in particular, this school at the University of Michigan overwhelmed the institution's mental health department because the students were so depressed. Because the faculty, as faculty do, had raised students' consciousness, had given them lots of content about the nature of social ills and how they should be changed and how they should want to change them, but they did not also raise commensurate capacity, right? So thank God that, so part of the focus group process was I worked with the students to say, OK, tell me about the times, I don't care if they're just microseconds, when it does work, when you are able to put the pieces together and you are able to enact change. Now, these students were all doing internships, all 100, actually 400 in the curriculum, all 120 of them were doing internships for 20 hours a week in all sorts of community-based agencies or government agencies. So when does it work? And they would say, OK, when I have time to connect and reflect and sort of put it all together and ask for myself, what does it mean? So we need more of that in the curriculum. I said, OK. So over the course of the next 2 years, I worked with these students to develop a curriculum intervention, basically, that helped them to connect, reflect, put the pieces together. And then we started to implement that curriculum with more and more students. And so in 2005, we recruited 3 different groups of incoming students. And they were low, medium, and high learners. So low, medium, and high levels of readiness. So low levels of readiness meant if you say, are you interested in being a change agent? They're like, no, absolutely not. No, thank you. I just want a job that pays lots of money and get me out of here. OK, fine. So the medium were like, well, maybe. Sounds kind of good. But, sounds like a bunch of liberal crap, possibly. We don't know. So, and then the high, of course, were, yeah, but I don't really know how to do that. OK. So, and what we found is that when they went through this curriculum, what we came at that time to call, excuse me, the integrative portfolio-based curriculum, by this time we're all on paper, we found that all of them, within the first 6 months even, had transformed, meaning that they changed their notion of who they were fundamentally and could tell you all sorts of examples of practices, things that they were doing in the world to create change. Now, and here's an example of a student pre and post 6 months. So while you read this, so this particular student saved the state of Michigan millions of dollars. What happened is that the state of Michigan has a Child Protective Services agency. They were still doing their assessment, their reports by hand. So families from one county to another, if a family moved, whatever, if you just can't imagine like what a nightmare that is. And so this student doing her internship there took it upon herself at the ripe age of 22, 21, that they should have I'm going to create them an access database system. And she doesn't mind if I use her name. Amanda, do you know how to do that? No. What makes you think they'll want you to do that? Well, I'm just going to use my youth and enthusiasm and see if they want it, da, da, da. So anyhow, they wanted it. And she ended up winning, before she even graduated from the School of Social Work, a National Social Work of the Year award. So, but to go from, no, I don't see myself, to yes, I can, and this is what I'm doing, and at first I just thought, well, this is fine. It's just happening with these extraordinary students. But the more we kept implementing it with more and more students, the same kind of transformation kept happening. So, but then came, this is the great thing about community-based participatory research, is that Then the faculty came along, and I was doing this as my PhD research. So the faculty then came along and said, well, what you say is happening and what actually is happening doesn't add up. So I've been doing all that reflection and feely stuff and whatever, connected to your identity forever, and that doesn't happen. So they sent in some process observers to observe what was happening, and come to find out that a lot more was happening than I was able at the time to explicate. And that was what was happening, and this has sort of been the discovery that's been formalized and tested a great deal. It was this thing called generative knowledge interviewing. So generative knowledge interviewing is this way to get at people's tacit knowledge. Now, it turns out, at the time, I didn't know anything about tacit knowledge. Now there's a lot to know about tacit knowledge. That's the knowledge that you and I have developed from life experience that lives below the level of cognition. So and it's the knowledge that we need for strategic insights, for innovation. It's the stuff that makes us unique, right? But we literally do not know what we know. And it gets better. The more you become expert in some area, the more that knowledge recedes into the tacit realm. That's why the worst people to go ask how to do something are the experts, because they can't tell you. And it's not that they don't want to tell you. They're often annoyed by the question because they think you're stupid. And the reason they think you're stupid is because part of that common sense is, right? Like, what are they? They don't get it? So, and actually, so this is what, so what's interesting is once I was able to sort of locate and explicate this generative knowledge interviewing process and then begin sort of testing, it turns out that no matter what group of students we were working with and no matter what school we were working with, the same kind of transformation began to happen. And so, so now I have a whole certification program for generative knowledge interviewing, but it's a way to retrieve that tacit knowledge that, and what I more and more begin to understand, that generative code that everybody has, that's made of aha moments and insights that are often so fast and so intuitive that, and we go on to the next moment and movement and we forget. So it's the thing that we are, but we don't know that we are. And it's an enormous amount of joy and discovery to also uncover that and bring that into the formal education process. So that's what underlies the Michigan Integrative Knowledge Portfolio process. So, okay, I'm going to speed along for a minute. Okay, so this is what a Michigan ePortfolio looks like. And there's some things here that I'd like to point out really quick. Number one is that at the top, the welcome goals, philosophy statement, work showcase, resume, that is similar to what some of the things that Trent was saying, that this is the end product. This is sort of like the professional website that people see. But down the side on the left, the creative writing, the editing, the leadership, strategy, and planning. The first process that students go through when they create an integrative knowledge portfolio is, it's got 4 steps. One of the steps is write down your top 10 learning experiences from anywhere in life. So imagine if you were to do that for a moment. Top 10 learning moments, and just raise your hand really quick. How many of you, if you just think about your top 3 learning moments from anywhere in life, how many of those top 3 for you happened in academic settings? That's okay. Actually, one of mine is. So yes. So that's probably why I'm an academic. So no, it really is. So so students write down their top 10 learning experiences from anywhere in life, and then we do this process of generative knowledge interviewing, and then they go through this reflective and dialogue process that's got very specific steps to it, lots of scaffolding, all that kind of stuff, and they create these examples of work. And these examples of work are very much based upon these questions that have been tested over 7 years that help students to not only retrieve the knowledge from these experiences, but also connect them to their academic knowledge and who they're becoming in terms of their own identities. So it turns out as students both go through the pedagogy, the integrative knowledge pedagogy, and create these portfolios, of course they have this transformative experience. And so that's why it's more and more we have portfolio pilots across undergraduate, graduate, in the hospitals with doctors in internal medicine, and we also have it on the business side of the house with HR. And so I think that I want to save time for questions. So I'm just going to really quickly, so the process, again, I said, is that first you identify and organize those key learning experiences. Now I just want to back up for a minute and say that I've spent the last, now I think 6 or 7 years in what I call ePortfolio land. And in ePortfolio land, one of the findings that has come from, I think, a lot of research in different institutions around the world is there used to be this notion that if you just supply students or people with good ePortfolio tools, that they will create their own ePortfolios. And I just want to say, the results are in, no, that doesn't happen. It doesn't happen yet because it's not culturally supported. It's not like Facebook in this sense. In Facebook, when all of your other friends are doing it, you want to do it, right? But the way that our students say, and students at other institutions say that it's different in the ePortfolio, is ePortfolio, particularly when it becomes about who you are and what you know and how you want to make a difference, it requires a level of thoughtfulness, of intentionality, of structured space, and feedback. So when students create these incredible reflections or meta-reflections, portfolio pages, and they put them out there and nobody looks at them, they were not motivated to continue to do them. So oftentimes to have a successful ePortfolio environment where students are connecting and reflecting and really learning to learn for life, that actually, it actually requires a cultural shift in the institution. So that's, it's not like give them the tools, it will happen. It's actually, there's overwhelming evidence to suggest that's not the case. So the second step is they create these knowledge artifacts. This is a really great example. This is a student, yeah, part of the beauty of being at a research institution where people don't think a lot about teaching is that, is they say things like, well, that's fine for upperclassmen and graduate students, but freshmen, 17-year-olds, 18-year-olds, they don't have any life experience meaningful enough to reflect upon. Right. So anyhow, so then we got to have a pilot with a bunch of freshmen. And this student, her name was Anita. And so the first day we asked students, do you see yourself as a change agent? Do you really, whatever? And Anita would say, well, actually, one of my values is I really like to help people. I like to be of service. Great. And so it turns out when Anita wrote down her top 10 learning experiences and she went through the generative interviews with her peers, turns out that Anita had already created, by the time she landed at the University of Michigan, 2 different institutions on 2 different continents in 2 different languages. But she didn't know that she was a change agent. So now imagine how much more knowledge you have compiled and compacted and reseeded into your tacit realm. So, and imagine what it would be like if you had gone through college and had an experience where you learned how to retrieve and to explicate and to document that knowledge and its impact as you were moving along. Personally, I would have loved it. So, yeah. So, and this is Anita right before her 18th birthday. So for the sake of time, so we can open up for questions, I'm going to just run real quick to the end a lot. OK, so the other thing that over 85% of our students who go through the ePortfolio process say that the most important thing that they did, or the thing that really stuck with them the most, is creating a philosophy statement. So after they do these examples of work based on life-wide learning, they go through another process which really helps them to identify the values and commitments that they have and their strengths that underlie their decision-making. Again, that's part of their unconscious tacit knowledge. And they learn to explicate that in their philosophy statements, and they become these powerful documents that this particular student, when she came to the class, didn't know, or she was thinking about leaving the University of Michigan. She was an African-American student, in her words, from the projects in Detroit. She was tired of this incredibly white and privileged institution and didn't feel like she belonged there anymore. And to make a long story short, after she went through the portfolio process and began to sort of gather her knowing in one place, particularly all the insights and knowledge that she had as an underrepresented minority in this predominantly white space, as she brought that into her own knowledge-making process, not only did she come to know what she knew, but she also then saw herself as a knowledge producer and now has entered the joint PhD program in urban planning and social work. So, so anyhow, so the student's identity of themselves, and this is an example of another student's philosophy statement. So I'm just going to apologize and move on. Oh, so there's assessment piece, but this is not about assessment, so OK. Really quickly, the only thing that this requires of educators is that they change everything. And it's funny, when people want to go through a curriculum change and think it should take a year, I always say, well, the only thing for this, I said, well, the only thing it's going to take is they have to change their relationship to space, time, their assumptions about learning, and their own identity. And there's a paper I'm writing about that right now. And so it's called because all of the educators, what happens is they get in and they really want to integrate this in their curriculum, into their course, and they begin to do it, and this is so hard. But none of them stop doing it. They all, now this is the thing, especially at a Research One university, they all keep going, and they end up going through this profound change. And then sort of the unexpected innovations, next step is that just co-founded the Institute for Generative Knowledge that really is an institute that's going to be working, doing everything from certification programs to research on this integration of tacit and explicit knowledge in different domains. So that's it.
Thanks. Okay, I guess we got 5 minutes for questions, so shoot away. Let's see, I guess back there with the glasses lady.
I'm wondering if there was, I mean, I know we're dealing with higher education, but is there any model like this? So, hello. Is there any kind of model that could be incorporated into earlier education? Because, you know, we talk a lot about kids, young kids, needing to have a thirst for learning, and public education isn't really working in that way. But doing something like this, where they're constantly reflecting on their own stuff, could be extraordinarily powerful. Do you know of anything like this, or is this program available in any kind of early education?
To be honest, I have not. I've tested out with, I have teenage kids. So I've tested out with middle schoolers and high schoolers, and it's worked really, really well. And for that reason, I mean, because I was talking to their teachers, but right now I'm working on developing modules to actually, I mean, I've published a manual recently, but it doesn't actually have the generative knowledge interviewing in it, because I realized that it's like dance. You can read about dance, but you can't learn to dance without actually having to dance. So, yeah.
There are a number of school districts around the country and also around the world, K-12 or primary and secondary schools around the world that are requiring portfolios. It's rare to find them used in the way that Melissa's talking about, or that I like to see at the college level. Some of the platforms tend to be more like learning management systems for teachers, for tracking and so forth. So it's a different kind of different kind of culture to integrate it into. And there are, of course, all kinds of privacy concerns and so forth, so it has to be more limited. Now, community colleges, I think, probably will lead the way in terms of higher education, in terms of adoption of portfolios, because there, a lot of the courses, you're dealing with something palpable, something actually physical. You're making, you're doing cosmetics, or you're doing a design in a window for a store or something. You know, there's all different kinds of very practical courses that they teach. They really lend themselves to being, showing evidence of that to build. So, I mean, there's a lot of community colleges that are now talking about, system-wide implementation.
But actually, so LaGuardia Community College in New York City has, I think, the largest instantiation of ePortfolios for student-centered learning, this kind of identity development. But it's also supported across the entire curriculum. And so that when students go from one course to another, they're often in that course, it's understood that they're going to create artifacts from that course that they can then put in their portfolio. And so that's why those of us who are working on these kinds of implementations within institutions they end up being institutional change processes, because where you get teaching learning centers involved or provost office involved, things like that.
Yes, over here.
So,
Can you repeat the question?
So who did our students allow access to the portfolios? Okay. Well, as Trent suggested earlier, in our campus, students have absolute ownership over their portfolios. And so they allowed me access to their portfolios. We are going around right now prodding hundreds and hundreds of students right now to give us permission to put them up on our public gallery. We do have some portfolios on the public gallery site. It's mportfolio.umich.edu. But they're by no means the best ones. And so that's a challenge that, again, we have to work that into the culture. We can't say to students, you own your learning, but we're going to rip this off from you, right? So our practice have to be congruent with, this In order for students to actually become invested in these kind of reflective practices, they have to feel like they own it. Otherwise, it doesn't really work.
Okay, time for one last question. Person standing up in the back? Yes.
Thanks. An interesting twist that some local students took that they were frustrated with their musicians, and they actually have developed a product for music schools of music to allow students to apply for admission through an ePortfolio product. Then they're already used to using it as they go on. So they have actually used the technology on the upfront so that students can submit it. Otherwise, they get a lot of DVDs, CDs, links to YouTube pages, everything else. So again, it's starting that process very, very early.
Right, good. All right, thanks for your time. If there's any other questions, you can come forward and talk to us. Thanks a lot.